This week, China relaxed its ban on one Australian product, thermal coal, as energy shortages forced its hand. But otherwise, its attitude remains unchanged, and perhaps even more so after former Prime Minister Tony Abbott's visit to Taiwan this week. Just have a listen.
It is quite possible that Beijing could lash out disastrously quite soon. Our challenge is to try to ensure that the unthinkable remains unlikely and that the possible does not become the probable. That's why Taiwan's friends are so important now, to stress that Taiwan's future should be decided by its own people and to let Beijing know that any attempt at coercion would have incalculable consequences.
Joining me now from Beijing, Australia's former ambassador to China, Geoff Raby, who now runs a consultancy, Geoff Raby and Associates. Geoff, can I just start with Tony Abbott's comments there? Do you think they will delay any thawing in China's freezing out of Australia and its goods?
No, Ross, frankly, Abbott's comments will be seen here in Beijing as a simple joke. They'll have no credibility, no weight, and thankfully, they will not play into the bilateral relationship between Australia and China.
OK, can I then go to other matters that happened this week? Of course, you've got President Joe Biden, who has come out and indicated that he believes that China will continue to conform with the current arrangements between the two countries in regards to Taiwan. It seems also as though there is now at least formal conversations taking place between the US president and Xi Jinping in China. Is that at least a positive for the world and potentially even for Australia in the longer term?
Well, absolutely. It's extremely important. It's their second conversation since Biden was elected. There's been, last week, a very important meeting of high-level officials between the US and China in Zurich. And of course, Xi Jinping in the last couple of days has been speaking to the newly appointed Japanese Prime Minister. Now, see the contrast with Australia. Whilst these major conversations between China and the US and Japan and all other countries are taking place, Australia has no official contact with China. The Australian Prime Minister cannot speak to Xi Jinping. So to the extent that these conversations are going on, it's extremely positive. But at the same time, it highlights the extent to which Australia's failure of diplomacy in recent years has made Australia an outlier. So we are unable to engage with China in the way we need and must to protect and defend our own interests.
It's interesting because we had on the program last week the Finance Minister and the former Trade Minister, Simon Birmingham, who really reiterated that point you just made. Let's just pick up a little of what he had to tell us at that time about the lack of a formal conversation.
Not at the ministerial level. Now, officials have dialogue on certain technical issues from time to time, and that's to be encouraged, and we hope to see continue. We're in a position where, as the Prime Minister's made clear in recent days, we're starting to look at how international movement and travel becomes something more open, more possible in the weeks and months ahead as part of that COVID transition. That's also going to see perhaps a bit more of a normalisation of some of the other areas of international engagement, including the different fora and events that leaders and ministers around the world can engage with each other, even informally at, and hopefully that will provide some scope for some discussion.
Now, Geoff, I know that you are a non-executive director of Yancoal, which is potentially a beneficiary as a result of this reopening of trade with coal, as China needs that, in particular coal for electricity generation. Do you get a sense even that might be a small opening that might see more trade eventually come back between Australia and China?
Yeah, I mean, we hope so, and any opening of trade is positive. But I think at the moment it's still not really a policy-driven shift, but rather just extreme necessity. The energy shortages in China are very severe. They've arisen largely because officials have overdone it on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And now suddenly, with peak energy consumption occurring, these shortages are real, and the government is in Beijing, to some extent, is panicking. So I think whilst it's welcome that we're selling coal again in small quantities to China, this is not a policy-driven shift. But it is an important time, I think, for the Australian government to do a couple of things. First, I think it's excellent that the Australian government has now recognised China's COVID vaccine, Sinovac, and I think we're one of the first Western governments in the world to do that. I would urge the Australian government to make more of that very positive move. Secondly, we should say very clearly that anything that harms China's economic growth harms Australia. And so we stand ready to sell coal to China. Thirdly, I think the Australian government should come out with a very strong positive statement that we support China's accession to the old Trans-Pacific Partnership, now called CPTPP. I know that's a mouthful. And we will support that if China lifts its unjustified bilateral measures against us. This is real negotiating leverage, and I cannot understand why the government has not come out now and said, yes, we welcome China to be part of this group, but of course it can only be part of this group if it removes its measures against Australia. Because after all, what we want China to do is to be part of an international system of rules that govern trade, and this group is a particularly important element in that. So there's a lot of opportunity there, but the government seems to be missing in action.
Geoff Raby from Geoff Raby and Associates, I appreciate your time today on the program.
My pleasure, Ross. Nice to talk to you again.